when they walked in. Teams isn't letting us download stuff like the recordings for whatever reason. I am recording them and it saves them automatically for like 30 days. So yesterday's and today's, whenever it finally lets us download again, whatever the bug is that's messed up is fixed, I will get those uploaded, but I don't know when that's gonna be. Yeah. Didn't get to check into that yesterday with everything else going on. I was a little busy yesterday. I did start grading your quizzes yesterday. So far, so good with everything, but like I think I read on yours, I don't have expectations for answers, which is kind of fun for me. And it's good for your grades. If I don't have any set, like, this is what I'm looking for as I'm reading these answers, then generally I will accept pretty much anything. But I kind of like that. I like the variety that it's giving me versus that specific expectation. So yeah, I should finish those today, unless something major happens again. Yeah, a lot happened yesterday. I almost went into anaphylactic shock and my identity was stolen. So it was a busy day yesterday.
Well, I'm glad you're still here.
Yeah. But the funny thing is I still went to bed that night and I was like, you know what? Nothing majorly bad happened today.
Still 3 days.
I'm still here. We caught the identity thing before anything bad happened. So I mean, like, I can't complain. It was just a busy day yesterday.
Yeah.
Unexpected.
It was unexpectedly busy, yes. But no major complaints. It was just a kind of annoyance. I don't foresee that happening again today, but yeah, it's already started off a little bit of an easier day than it was yesterday. So we are going to wrap up with Hellenistic period art today. I am going to be skipping quite a few of these and just talking about some of the main ones to give you guys a grasp and a sense of what Hellenistic art looks like. This PowerPoint's already up, by the way, if you want to go back and look at some of them. I might mention a couple of them because they're kind of awesome if you want to check them out later. But yeah, Hellenistic period pretty much begins when Alexander the Great dies in 323. At that point, Greece decides to divide the empire back into those multiple city-states and get rid of the league that was working together. But I mean, the Macedonians already owned it at that point, and what ends up happening is they put different rulers in different city-states, the Macedonians do. So yeah. Hellenistic period art is attributed with being Greek-like, but really the only commonality between each city-state is that they speak the same language. That's it. We are going to take a look at architecture produced from the Hellenistic period first, and then we'll look at some sculptures. This guy, Hippodamus, which is a fun name, mostly because it has the word hippo in it. Yeah, I'm coming off of Benadryl, so small things amuse me right now. Hippodamus of Miletus was a urban planner, meaning he plans out cities. Yay, she is here. I like your sweatshirt, by the way. He plans out different cities. He did work along the same lines as Polyclitus, as in the sense that he thought there was a mathematic formula to build the perfect city. Did it work out? No, because populations grow and stuff happens with buildings when populations grow, as in they're added on and they don't quite fit the original scheme usually. But his original design had the city based on a grid plan with different blocks, and it used the natural terrain Other planners do follow his example, and it's a planner in specific that we're going to be talking about next week in Rome that follows his plan, which is why I'm taking the time to mention him, even though I don't like talking about architecture. But yeah, here is Priene. Priene is was a part of the Greek Empire under Macedonia in Turkey. And of course, this is a recreation, as most of the city isn't there anymore, since it was the 4th century BCE. There's really just ruins and other areas have built up. But Priene was using Hippodamius's planning despite the slope of the hills that existed in Turkey. But it just has your basic city block planning. The blocks were all identical. The houses were supposed to all be identical in size. And it allowed for 5,000 people. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, these things don't usually work. There's no way that everyone's going to want to live on the same size block in the same size house with the same amount of houses on each block. And the city's never going to expand or grow. In theory, it's very aesthetically pleasing to look at, but it is very short-lived. You're going to see the same thing happen next week with the Roman version. But yes, at the very center of the city was what's known in Rome as a forum or a marketplace. You would also have your temple nearby at the city center, as well as the theater. And those were all at the very middle, and the houses are around them, which the Roman guy does almost the same thing, except he does his in a cross format with the stuff literally in the center. This one's not quite there yet, but yeah, same basis. Another cool building is the Stoa of At-Alos in Athens. This is the reconstructed version, which the American School of Classical Studies paid for. But it's kind of neat. It has 2 stories. The bottom story is Doric, the top story is Ionic. Originally used for stores and civic offices. This is one that I'm going over very quickly. And if you want to read more about it, you can. But that's pretty much the gist of it. On the bottom floor would have been the stores. On the top floor was where the offices were. Pergamon is another interesting place. The city was born out of Alexander the Great's conquests, and it is where this used to be. I'm going to spend more time on this than the ruins. So the altar of Zeus used to be at Pergamon. Of course, this is what's left of it. It was an elevated platform temple, which did not form, well, it's not your basic rectangle, which you can see, obviously. It had 2 wings on each side. You would walk up the center stairs into the temple. This is just the front facade. There would have been a bit of a rectangle behind it where the actual statue of Zeus was housed. It does use Ionic columns, but the most interesting part is the fact that it did not have a pediment, which was pretty common for Greek temples at this point. It was kind of a standard. No pediment. And instead of metopes or friezes, because without the pediment you can't have those, it had this large amount of decoration as you walk up the stairs. And those sculptures on the stairs depict Zeus battling the Titans. But there's one particular subject matter that I'm going to focus on a little bit more because rather than Zeus battling the Titans, which is what's happening here, the most interesting thing is that it celebrated the Greeks' victory over the Gauls as well, just like how Greece used to celebrate its victory over Persia. Now they're trying to create that new sense of nationalism, just instead of the Persians, now it's the Gauls. The Gallic people were French. They're from France. The people that created these sculptures made sure you'd be able to easily tell the difference between the Greek men and the Gallic men. The Gallic men were shown with long, curly, shaggy hair and, oh, what are those things called? I think I wrote it on here because I knew I wouldn't remember. Might not have. Oh, it has a name. It's a torque. There it is. Torque. I knew I wouldn't remember it. Like T something. It's basically a golden necklace that goes around their necks, which was what all of the Gallic men wore. So curly hair, torque. That's how you can tell this is a Gaul. This is a Greek. Gaul, Greek, Gaul, Greek. Very different examples of dying warriors. The last time we looked at dying warriors, we looked at those archaic ones. The one smiling, and the other one that was not smiling and a little bit more realistic. This one, however, unlike those, uses a much more dramatic pose. That's because with Hellenistic sculptures, you have drama. The Hellenistic period is all about trying to create that theatrical drama. So with Hellen art or Hellenistic art, you're going to have almost like a theatrical pose, over exaggerated movement happening with all of these figures, which you can kind of already tell looking at this. This man, instead of just like standing, holding his wife and holding the sword, he's making sure to like turn around and create this dynamic composition, an exaggerated movement. This also, just like some of our forerunners in late classical period, requires you to walk all the way around the piece. There's a different viewpoint from each side. From the front, you can't see everything. You can't see his face. If you walk to the side, you can see his face. If you walk behind him, you can see more stuff. If you walk to the side, you get a clearer view of her. This is the story of the Gallic king. Once they've learned that they were losing, he murdered his wife and then himself, in order to avoid his wife being turned into a slave, which is what usually happened to the women of enemies that were captured, and he would have been killed as well. So he's already killed his wife. Her body is limp. The artist made sure to illustrate that there is no life in this form. Her arms are hanging there, her head is hanging there. He is obviously not being portrayed as lesser than, like our early Greek examples of enemies. They were usually portrayed as weaker or smaller. He is in a heroic pose. He has muscles. He looks strong. So they're not viewing their enemies in this demeaning manner anymore. Maybe because they were conquered. I don't know. They did get owned by the Macedonians, so maybe they learned their lesson about pride. Who knows? But we also have him looking over his shoulder. Like I mentioned earlier, there's drama. There's also that need to see from different viewpoints that's happening in Hellenistic art, which already began in the late classical and is just evolving in the Hellenistic period. Here's another one. This one's very similar to the pose of the previous dying warriors. This is the dying Gaul trumpeter. He has a trumpet on the ground right next to him. He is looking down, once again, that shaggy hair and the torque. He has blood coming out of his side from a wound, which is what he's looking down at. But once again, he is shown strong, heroic. He's not shown as a weak opponent, despite the fact that he is losing. But also, even though he is the losing side, the artist has made sure to be extremely detailed. You can even make out the veins on his legs and his forearms. So very highly detailed during the Hellenistic period. Once again, we saw that happening already in the late classical, and it's just getting stronger and stronger as we go throughout. The Romans are, of course, going to adopt it and carry it even further. But once again, another really dynamic pose. He's actually doing an action rather than just staring out at us. But the men weren't the only one that got the high detail exaggeration. Women also did. This is Venus de Milo, probably the most famous female statue ever. There's a bunch of copies of this one too. Is it as nice as the Venus that we looked at yesterday? I don't know. doing your refresher? Possibly. It's been a hot minute. Let's go back to it. This is yesterday's Venus Praxiteles. She has that serene expression and a softness to her. It's pretty much the same subject matter. She is coming from the back. What are some of the differences? The S is definitely more pronounced in this one. So to give you an idea of what her, since she's missing her arms, one of her arms was doing this, and the other one is kind of doing this too. Our Praxiteles Venus was doing this. Yeah. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
Anyone know that one of them is entirely nude? Yes.
This one, she's a little more like.
She's much more modest. Yeah. She's trying to cover up. She was in the process of putting her robe on and she got caught. The other one, she's like, I'm going to pretend.
Oh no.
Oh no, you caught me. Yeah, definitely. This, not quite as erotic as the last one, but it's still a little sensual. It's meant to tease the spectator in like, oh, if I stick around long enough, am I going to see her naked kind of manner. The other one also kind of along that lines as well. But the other one, she was entirely naked already. But wait, there's more. Specifically on eroticism, a couple of you guys stuck around and saw this one yesterday. This is Barberini Fawn. Very dynamic posture here. This has not been used as a pose yet. This one is extremely sexual. It's all about being erotic. That's the purpose of this. This piece is like put in front of you saying, hi, I'm erotic. This is my purpose, to entice you. Nothing much beyond that. And that was achieved thanks to that very dynamic pose there, which would not have happened before the Hellenistic period. He also has that intense expression on his face that came around during late classical and was definitely expanded upon during the Hellenistic period. His brows are furrowed. He's in the middle of a dream. This guy is sleeping. It's also during the Hellenistic period that we see Greeks produce images of people sleeping. That was never a subject matter before. There were quite a few different images of sleeping people. We're going to see another one in a second. This is just one of them. The other one is much different. It is not sexual. But yeah, so we have a faun who has drank too much wine. He has a flask somewhere down here. And he's laid out a rug or tapestry on a oddly shaped branch and is taking a nap. And his face kind of illustrates the idea of dreams and fantasy. Yeah, I told the two that stayed after yesterday. It took me a lot of images to find one that was not extremely inappropriate for this one. I went through a lot of photos. Most of them are frontal. This is from the side. Yeah. I saw the frontal one and I was like, oh, I can't show this. I'm like, I'm okay with nudity, but I don't think I can show it. But if you're curious, you can look that up. And like I was telling the others, this is probably I'm used to seeing a lot of papers written on like majorly famous artworks when I'm Googling stuff. But for some reason with this one, there's a whole lot of college student papers on it and a lot of tweets. Yeah. I'm like, this is kind of a random one to choose. I kind of want to delve into the psychology of that. Do a little more research, like why? Why is it this one? I mean, I understand why. Why? Here's our other sleeping one, like I mentioned, very different. Kind of ironic though, this one's Eros.
Yeah, very good.
So Eros is another name for Cupid. This is just baby Cupid sleeping. He's taking a nap. He's got some dreams on him. Very definitely a baby's form here. Some of the other versions of Cupid that we have seen and will see are a muscular baby. You'll definitely see that when we get to Rome. This one is your chunky little baby. He's just got some wings on the back. This is another one that you'd want to view from all sides so that you can take in those wings on the back as they are pretty highly detailed. Another one, interesting pose. His arm is leaning over to the side, just like a baby would actually look when they're sleeping. This is an interesting one. We're not going to talk about it. But yeah, the defeated boxer. If you have some free time, you might want to check it out. Even has blood coming out of him in copper. Definitely not heroic. This wouldn't have seen, you wouldn't see this before Hellenistic period. They were all about heroism. And of course, the old woman. We talked about her in my other classes. This is another scene that would not be shown in any other period before Hellenistic. Someone from a lower social status. Women were considered very low, just barely above slaves in the Greek society. And an old woman is lower than a useful woman, as she has no longer any purpose to society. So statues like this, people wouldn't want to buy them before the Hellenistic period. It wasn't your idealized figure. You wouldn't want to look at this. It's reality. You want to see mythology. During the Hellenistic period, though, you see images like the defeated boxer and the old woman pulled up. And it shows you what things actually were, and people were interested in purchasing it at that point in time. So that kind of tells you social mentality is changing in Greece towards the end of their empire. Why? You can form your own theory on that. Maybe because they saw that time was closing and they needed to stop wasting times in La La Land with myths. Maybe, I don't know. Who knows? But yeah, social realism is expanding towards the end of Greece. Here's another example of some realism. This is Demosthenes. He was a very famous orator during his time, but he had a hard life in the end. He was trying to fight for Greece towards its end. And of course, if you're familiar, Greece does end up getting taken over, which frustrated him. He ends up taking his own life because he's so saddened. This pose and posture and his facial expression kind of express that. So not heroic, not idealized. Could they have done that with him? Yes, because he was a really famous orator during his prime, like one of the best. They could have done the lovely little speech-giving symbol of an arm outstretched and someone with an open mouth, which was a usual orator pose, but they didn't for him. Now, eventually Rome does take over Greece. Hellenistic art shifts a little bit during this time. The Romans love the heroic mythological poses. So yeah, people are wanting that. There's a demand for it again. So artists are making those images once again, but they are incorporating those dynamic poses. Under their new patrons, they're producing works like Laocoon and his sons here. This is the Laocoon group. If you're interested in the artists, they are down here. It's a trio of artists that made several different artworks from that period. It is based off of earlier Hellenistic art before the social realism gained a foothold. You can kind of see that in the very dynamic poses that are happening. It harkens back to that like Barberini fawn before, like I said, the social realism pieces. But it illustrates the mythological story of Laocoon and his two sons. Laocoon wants to warn the Trojans in Virgil's story about the wooden horse. And yeah, they send a serpent to go and kill him and his son so that they can't warn the Trojans about the horse. And that's what's happening here. And there is hierarchic scale going on in the actual story. Laocoon's sons are old. They are adults. They don't look like it here. They look like muscular children. That has to do with hierarchy. They showed Laocoon as the largest figure and his sons as very small muscular children. Another one by those same artists. He's one of the figures of the story, well, one figure of Odysseus. Odysseus, one of the main figures in mythology. This is a close-up that I like to look at because it does show that exaggerated expression coming back during this period. And it's going to be really popular when we start off Rome next week, because that's pretty much where we're picking back up at, is those exaggerated facial expressions, but still those heroic figures. Very dramatic Hellenistic art. That's like one word if you were going to sum it up, drama. We are going to sum it up. We talked about a lot with the Greek art. We talked about geometric, archaic, oriental, Daedalic, early classical, high classical, late classical, Hellenistic, Hellenistic under Roman, a lot. We covered a lot. Let's see if we can sum stuff up. I'm going to give each person one thing. I'm going to give you a few seconds to think of something. So I am going to just go this way. So Grace, I'll give you a few seconds. Geometric style, think of a way to sum it up. Archaic, early classical, Brandon, high classical, late classical, and Hellenistic I will do. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to try and sum that up. Or maybe a minute. I can give you a minute. I feel like the early, high, and late classical is probably the harder one. Grace, what can you say for geometric?
For geometric art, a lot of it is focused on like shapes and like shapes of it. So a lot of the compositions just follow.
Yeah, that one's probably the easiest one. Shapes, hence the name. Yeah.
For archaic, we have the lovely archaic smile.
Yeah.
Also, they're starting to follow like musicians and looking at their formulas and seeing how they do this.
Yeah. So stuff is progressing a little bit as we go, and that's kind of the story here. Brandon, did you get something? That was like the harder ones.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I were to sum it up, I guess early classical would be like starting of structures and
Yeah.
statues. I mean,
Yeah.
Just the beginning.
Really, yeah, it is.
What we're getting into.
Yeah, so like early classical is kind of hinting at towards the High Classical, which is the next one, they're starting to kind of study what people actually look like, which does take us into the High Classical.
Okay. And the high classical is the first medical formula.
Yeah, they started to use math, yeah. And then of course, really realistic postures and well, math. And late classical, they are still using proportions and equations. They just slightly changed them. Instead of 1/7, now it's 1/8. So it's still happening. Did you have anything else? Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So because of that political upheaval, people are viewing the sculptures differently. So we see stuff changing as far as postures and softness is added, as well as a little bit of expression. And of course, all of that goes like crazy haywire in the Hellenistic period, and they start doing over exaggerated poses and adding a lot of drama. So that's pretty much it for the Greeks in a nutshell, which does take us into the Etruscans. The Etruscans, very similar to like archaic Greece. Another way to think of the Etruscans is they were Italy before Rome was Italy. We're basically talking about pre-Rome, like we talked about the Aegeans before we talked about the Greeks, because this is what came before. Just a little summary for a brief introduction. Actually, I'll go to, yeah, you can watch this one. I think that's all I had on this one. Should rewind. So it's going to give us a really short introduction. We probably won't watch all of it because it is kind of a longer one. But it kind of gives you an introduction to the basis of their society and what was important to them, which usually will shape what art is like for these people too. Oh yeah, funny thing. Tuscany, named after the Etruscans. That's where they were like originally from, if you're trying to get like a geographic location. Those trade networks pretty much are the reason why they take off. They're at the crossroads of a lot of different trade networks. And of course, with trade comes money into your cities. I mean, the Etruscans started off in like little huts, basically, and because of trade, they advance into a really civilized society very quickly. So they end up switching from cremating to necropolises. A necropolis is basically, it translates to city of the dead. So they buried their dead in sarcophagi. And the tombs that they were encased in were kind of similar to the ones the Mesopotamians and Egyptians used. They had like table settings inside of them and beds. So basically an entire house in these tombs where these sarcophagi are. And I'm saying that because we're going to be looking at some sarcophagi today. That's why I mentioned earlier that the Etruscan art is going to be very referential to archaic. In Greece at this point in time, they're doing archaic art. These guys are going to Greece seeing the archaic art, just like the Greeks went to Egypt and saw the Egyptian art. It's just playing on and continuing on. I think you're probably catching on to a theme with art history too. Trade. Yeah. So in a nutshell, they're copying the Greeks. But like I mentioned earlier, they are Rome before Rome. So it is out of this society that Rome gets a lot of its customs. And as we work on our assignment today, which is where I'm stopping this video, you're gonna come across some of those customs. So we are going to divide into two groups and do some independent study and then come back together and share everything. Brandon's done this before. This is a little bit more of an advanced version of it though than the last one. So our two groups, which now I know the page numbers are a little off. Give me a second. We can go 3-2 and they're about the same amount of pages, so it's not going to be any different. If anyone in particular wants to do early Etruscan art and anyone in particular wants to do late Etruscan art, those are the two groups. But when you get into your groups, you're each going to have jobs. So the jobs being a recorder / artist, that person is going to be making a PowerPoint or Google slide presentation. The other member or members are going to be helping to tell them what to put on it. So figure out if you want to be the person making the presentation or the person deciding what's on it. You do not need to include everything. You can pick just a couple of objects that you think characterize that particular era. So if you do early Etruscan art, pick one or two things that you think really sum up what that art or architecture is about during the early Etruscan art period. Put that image on there, figure out some important points that you want to add. That's it. If you're doing late Etruscan, please include the capital line wolf. That's my only request. But if you're doing late Etruscan, same thing. Choose like a couple of images or objects that you think really sum up them in the late Etruscan period. Put it on a presentation, find some talking points. At the end, actually probably tomorrow morning when we start off, you guys will come and share to the other half that didn't quite get that part because they were in the other group, what you decided. And once again, this is like a sum up. So find something, a couple things that sum up what that period is like. Any questions? Does anyone have a particular preference, early or late? I would too. That's my preference, but that's because I like the stuff in the late section better. It's not like it's easier. It's just what I like. So late, anyone want to be with Justin late? Grace will be with, okay. And you want to be late or early?
No.
It doesn't matter. They're the same amount of space.
I'll do.
Okay, so I would like you guys to find 3 objects then, one for each of you. And then you guys can do early 2 objects. Okay, and I am going to come and help. I'm not going to just leave you. Does anyone need a book? I have 2 books. Books. This one's all highlighted. It has the important stuff in there already. Does anyone want it?
I'll take your book.
There you go. Grace is like, heck yes. Because I did read through it and I know what I like in that section and it's ready.
I just know stories for late period.
Yeah, I know the stories for late period, that's why I like it more.
Oh, I have my book. I was just.
If anyone wants to look at
I'll
it,
look at it.
if anyone wants to look at it from either group to like figure out what I highlighted, you can.
I thought about it and I was like, this is what she likes.
This is what I like, yeah. Yeah. I'm like, you can figure out what I highlighted though. I did highlight the main point.
Oh, where's that blowing? You just put in the PowerPoint. I kind of don't know. I'm sorry.
3,
It's been a long night.
3,
And this is our summary section that hopefully we'll be able to answer you by the end if you would like to ask any questions or thoughts.
And it's kind of really important.
Yeah, you can make it. I do too. I like making PowerPoint, but my laptop's dead. So.
Early is like.
Oh, nice. I'm about to go.
You need like a paper book?
That's just, I like the.
I have another this one.
Yes, I have all that. Yeah, I haven't done that. I mean, so,
You're early. We're
we could,
are.
the wall.
Here. So it's gonna be here. The front kind of really. These are your two. So a bunch of tunes and a bunch of songs. So the other two are the two like a culture and a but it does.
I'll do,
Well, we do it on the time. Alright. Just make sure you include that one, because it pops up in one. I've never, studied like Roman mythology only like Greek, so I was kind of like, oh, that's funky, and then I was like, yeah. Then she explained why it was important. I was like, oh, that's what I was like. No, let's just skip over. Yeah, I agree. Because it's gonna be important. But the other one, I feel like more. And yeah, we're just gonna work on this the rest of the day, and then tomorrow when you come in we'll take like a few minutes to do that. Also remember tomorrow that you guys have that meeting we're gonna discuss. Yeah. I forgot to send out an email, and I was like, put everything on there.